today's meeting. All right. So we are now kicking off the way forward panel discussion, and I'm joined here, but as you can see, by three colleagues, and we also have Juliet is the fourth speaker online. I hope she's there. That's good. All right. So I guess we can kick off with Ana Catalina Ramírez, who is a technical specialist on occupational health, safety and health at the ILO. Please, Ana Catalina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lucia, and good afternoon to everybody. Thanks to the organizers for the invitation. I think it's really exciting to be here discussing about mental health. I mean, in the framework of the UN system. As Lucia mentioned, I work in the Occupational Safety and Health and Environment team in the ILO. But I'm also part of the ILO Staff Union, and I'm a OSH representative for the staff. And that had given me the possibility to, I would say, live the experience of putting together all these process that already Daniela and Mira explained to you. So it gives me a little bit, I would say, a two-side visions, the vision of someone that works on the topic, but also someone that is living it as a staff member. Well, I would like to focus my intervention on two aspects that I consider are essential for the way forward in the current context of the UN system that all of us we know is challenging, but also considering that all different organizations are going through different stages of the process. So I try to come with two, I would say, strategic or orientations that I believe are valid for all these different stages of the process we are in. The first one that I would like to develop is that we need to learn to value the process and not only the tools. And I think this is very important if we think that the process itself is more important in a certain way than the outcomes. And I will explain why I believe that. Sometimes we tend to reduce this type of initiatives to basically the tool, how we are assessing, what type of questionnaire, what type of checklist. Sometimes we try to be so perfect in building the tool that we forget that the tool is an element that is alive, that it will never be perfect if we don't use it, right? I can say it because of also our experience internally. I think we had discussed many times, and I'm looking at Daniela, I mean, how the tool should look like, right? And we wanted to swim, but we were not trying to learn how to swim. And I think this is something that happens in the UN, but happens in many enterprises and organizations. I think that the ILO WHO guidelines on mental health, the policy brief, it's very clear on that, or highlights very much that the process matters, because it's in the process that we will have really sustained participation. We will have dialogue. We will have feedback that are what are really critical for change. And this takes me to my second point, actually, on the process. It's about participation. Participation, yes, well, everybody was at the meeting, right? Yes, no, I have consulted. Well, what really participation means, no? And here we need to really consider that to be successful, we need to engage in meaningful participation of all staff, yeah, and the representatives. This is very important. And they should be, this participation should be at the core of every phase. And I think this is also one of the aspects that sometimes in the process, sometimes when we have deadlines, in the rush, in the need to complete the project, we forget, right? We are not only talking about information sessions, we are talking about participating in the risk assessment, we are talking about participating in the definition of the measures and the evaluation of those measures. A well-designed process ideally should be inclusive, and I think in the UN this is pretty much, I would say, necessary, but also challenging, because we are organizations with multiple offices, and we know that culture matters. And therefore, it's so important to understand the different configurations and structures of the offices where those projects are going to be implemented. So this bipolarity between HQ and field has to be broken when we talked about carry on this type of projects. But also has to be, I mean, in addition to participatory, has to trust, to foster trust, to foster really ownership and engagement. And there, I hear my voice. Sorry, you know. And then I would like to focus on ownership. And this is related with what I was saying about the different structures that the different UN agencies and the Secretariat have, right? When implementing, and at the ILO, we want to go global, right? We want to implement this in all offices, and we have discussed this extensively, I think, already within our committee. It's about the need of ensuring that there are gonna be this participation and representation in each office, and that to ensure that this is going to work, they need to have the ownership of the process and the decisions that are going to be taken in terms of what measures are going to be applied. And I think there was a question related to that in the panel before about, okay, you have some suggested measures or to be taken, but this is a suggestion. The decision of what would work in my context relies pretty much in that ownership in that office. And this is essential if we want this to be successful. Guidelines, and I'm talking here about also this duality, HQ, field. Guidelines are pretty much necessary, but we need to give the space for the ownership and the cultural adaptation and the social adaptation needed in each duty station in a certain way. The process, the PSRM, is basically based on the management system, the OSH management system, right? And if we see any OSH management system, but I'm thinking especially in the ILO guidelines for OSH management system, continuous improvement is the spirit of that idea, of that system, right? I mean, we do that action repeatedly and cyclical because we want to improve. We want to be able to act, to measure, and to improve. And I think that this is something that has to be embedded, of course, in this process as well. But to do that, it needs feedback, it needs reflection, and it needs also adaptation. And this is why, again, participation is key, but also offering to the committee, but also to all the staff, this, I would say, safety environment where they can really provide honest feedback on how things are going and how things can be improved when this is applied. The process itself is, I would consider, is an investment. It's an investment in organizational resilience. The process will enable actually staff and the organizations to adapt and to respond effectively during times of uncertainty, such the ones we are living, but also during the different crises, whether there are conflicts, there are crises related with natural events. And I think we saw that in the previous panel. I mean, also the agencies or the nature of the agencies within the UN have changed drastically. I think before it was a little bit this conception like, okay, we have these humanitarian agencies that we know they are always exposed to crises and to conflict, and and then we have other agencies, I don't know, like ILO. Well, they are working at the desk in the building in Geneva. They are not exposed to, and this has drastically changed, right? And Daniela was explaining that, Mira was explaining that about these very high, vulnerable context that where our colleagues are working, the staff are working, and this is the reality nowadays for, I would say, all international civil servants, right? So the organizational resilience is another aspect that this process can really strengthen. And the process as well, it's an opportunity for improving a learning culture and a culture of prevention. And I want to emphasize on that concept. I think we need to move towards this idea that, and is linked to the continuous improvement, that in a moment of organizational changes, that more and more we are seeing the need to adapt our organizational context, the way we work, not only because the world of work is changing, but also because our organizations are changing. The prevention has to be put forward, right? And this prevention means assessing the changes, assessing the organization, the new organizational modus operandi, but also the design of the positions. And I think for me, the challenge would be to arrive to such a culture that this is automatically done within all these review processes. And finally, the process itself becomes a protective factor. And I think you have discussed this, no? It fosters inclusion, empathy, communication, participation, and these are essential aspects to really maintain staff engaged, and also to maintain, to support staff in this time of uncertainty and change. The second aspect, and I will be very brief in this one, it's about roles and responsibilities. I know that this has also been mentioned during the panel. This is a collective endeavor. We cannot forget that, managing psychosocial risks is a duty of care of the employer. Broadly speaking, it's the duty of care of managing occupational safety and health, but it requires involvement from different parties. So it's not only an individual responsibility, and by this I want to highlight the fact that the burden of being well, it cannot be put only on the individual, right? It's the whole organizational environment that enable this process, that can enable the individual to look for this well-being and to, in certain way, do what needs to be done to pursue this well-being. Roles and responsibilities must to be clear, I think, for the process that we were talking about to be successful. If at the end these responsibilities and these roles are not clear, the management system cannot run, right? So who is going to move to the next step? Who's going to move the wheel? We need to have clarity on those roles and responsibilities. And when I talk about who, I'm talking about the administration in a large sense, the different departments that are directly engaged with this. I'm talking about high-level managers, first-line managers, and I'm talking about the individual staff members. For this to operate in a, I would say, harmonic and efficient way, it needs to have structures. So the model of the PSRM tool and the process as it's designed conceives to have these committees, I would say like that, or groups that have to be large enough to give participation to all the stakeholders. But also, we need to look at the different structures that we have at the workplace level, right? For example, the occupational safety and health committees, however they're called in the different agencies, that offer exactly that platform that it's, I would say, used to this management system approach. And that can be very important, not only to ensure that the process runs, but also to make the link between the psychosocial risk and other type of risks that may be present at the workplace. Finally, about roles and responsibilities, and I think there was a very pertinent question on that, about that is, okay, yes, I want to fulfill my role. I want to be responsible for what I have to do, but I need tools. I need training. I need a learning process. And this is also a very important part that is key if we want to these platforms and to these structures that will implement the process to be successful. Yes, well, this is what I wanted to share. There are some reflections about how we see the way forward of this, focusing on these two aspects that I believe are essential for the continuity of this during all the life that the UN has in front of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ana Caterina, for your intervention. And yes, and thanks also for emphasizing the process. We've been talking about these long meetings and sometimes complicated conversation, but I think all in this room could agree that having those conversations, as you said, is a learning process, is an opportunity for organizational growth as well. Now I'd like to give the floor to Juliet Donald, who is the Chief of Counseling and Organizational Culture Service at the World Food Programme, and is joining us online.
Thanks, Lucia, and thanks for having me as part of the panel. Sorry I couldn't be there in person in Geneva with you all, but enjoying the conversation so far. In terms of psychosocial risk assessment and mental health and duty of care, I think this fits nicely with the topic of this panel about the ways forward. I can talk a little bit on the psychosocial risk assessment that WFP has done so far. It's fairly in line with what the other UN colleagues have shared around what they're doing across their organizations. But in terms of way forward, it's about how do we make sure that psychosocial risk assessment stays as part of our activity. There's a lot of emphasis being put on setting it up, but looking long term, how do we keep it as an integral part of what we do, that it's not just a momentary assessment that fades over time, but rather becomes an integrated part of the work. So Lucia, you'll have to tell me whether you can move the slides forward. So the way it was set up for WFP was what was called the team support program, moving away from this idea of assessment. And I have to say, years as a psychologist, when we say we're coming in to do an assessment, it can really get people's backs up. The psychologists are coming to assess us, but presenting it as the team support program was a really nice way of saying this is a tool to support you in the work that you do. So teams can really benefit from this. And as colleagues have talked about, it's that buy-in from management, it's that buy-in from leaders, and it's the buy-in from the people who are taking part in the assessment that really help make it a successful intervention. So WFP has had it set up, and we've gone from a pilot study in the Southeast Asia region. We're now in the process of rolling it out across the organization based on what we've learned from the pilot study, that we do an initial assessment, we do small group focus groups to find out more, we do the quantitative data, then the qualitative data piece, we do the risk analysis and reporting, and then it's not just psychosocial risk assessment, it's psychosocial risk management. And so then we go into, once we've diagnosed what we can see is going on, we do the response plan piece. And that's where our colleagues in other units or divisions across WFP have been integral in making sure that the response plan we do really harnesses in on all the mental health actions that are taking place across the organization to do a response plan that really draws on internal resources that currently exist already within the organization. It's not necessarily about having to hire external consultants to provide the step forward, but rather what's already happening within WFP that we can use to move the dial on things. And so we have a group called the Fostering Synergies Group. It's across a number of different disciplines in WFP. And actually, when we completed the UN Strategy Mental Health Scorecard, it was a really good reflection of how much mental health activity exists beyond the counseling space. When we look at mental health lives in HR policies, it lives in risk management, it lives in a lot of different domains. And so when we do the psychosocial risk management piece, we draw on those domains as part of the response plan. So turning it over to why has psychosocial risk assessment come to the forefront, as many people talked about, these are not just wellness risks or psychosocial risks, it's really organizational risks. And that's where we've anchored a lot of our work in presenting this as not really a psychosocial issue, but it's a risk issue. And so that's where the duty of care piece has really come in that we have an entire unit dedicated to duty of care in WFP. And it's looking at how can we not just take care of people, but how can we mitigate risk or warn of risk when we know about it, and what can we do to protect people from these risks. And so it aligns with the mental health audit that WFP had done at the end of last year and early this year. There's the Joint Inspection Unit recommendations, and there's a number of regulatory bodies asking for psychosocial risk assessment to be part of our work. And what we've done is try and answer that in a way that makes sense across the organization. And as many of the UN colleagues have mentioned today, psychosocial risk assessment, as counselors, we're often the technical lead on it, but it's a process that needs to have that buy-in and support from across the organizations for it to be truly successful beyond individual support to systemic support or systemic change. So the wellness strategy here is one of the key drivers for the work that we're doing. As counselors, of course, we'll do key interventions for individuals. Psychosocial risk assessment fits very nicely into goal number 2 with the healthy team structure. And then that duty of care piece is that goal number 3 of how to create an enabling and supportive workplace. And when we give support to teams in terms of psychosocial risk management, we're actually feeding back up to workplace culture, which leads into that duty of care and inclusion framework, and fits well within the call from our hires up in WFP to contribute to that as technical experts. This is probably just a diagram more along the same. When we talk about duty of care, when the conversations first started, people said, well, duty of care is mental health. No? In a sense, yes, mental health is a big part of it, but as you can see from this diagram, duty of care is of course broader than that. And the key pillars shown in this diagram are some of the key pillars that we work with actually in psychosocial risk assessment. So management services, human resources, and security. These are the key partners in psychosocial risk assessment in the work that we're doing to have the team support program and the data that it creates feed back into the frameworks that guide any of the regulatory focus or policy pieces that are moving forward in this. So the duty of care and inclusion framework, this team support program is seen as duty of care in action for WFP, which is kind of a, yes, duty of care in action, so to speak. So duty of care as this non-waiverable risk obligation to prevent foreseeable harm. And so that's where psychosocial risk assessment can really come into that piece. Moving to how it fits together. So mental health as, providing early risk detection and mitigation, also preventing escalation of known risks. So that's a key piece of the objectives of duty of care. But we come down to this joint, say kind of, what would I call it? Principles. So the main principles of duty of care is around staff well-being, safety, and resilience. And of course, psychosocial risk assessment fits thematically very in line with those pieces. And so the key integration of psychosocial risk assessment into risk management frameworks is a big part of the duty of care work that we're doing. So using data from psychosocial risk assessment, we've been able to work with our duty of care colleagues and incorporate mental health factors into the corporate risk register and the organizational risk catalog. Now, there are always mental health and psychosocial factors before, but perhaps a little broad and not updated. Whereas using data from the psychosocial risk assessment tool, it means that we can make them very specific. We can keep them updated according to trends that are happening within the organization. And we have those two pieces then completely linked and data-driven. It also goes back to the idea of mental health as a shared organizational responsibility and something that we're all pitching into to create a healthier work environment. So the team support program is happening very much at the field level. The duty of care and inclusion framework is happening at the organizational level. And how this fits together, again, thematically, but also in a sense of coherence of why these things are important and why are they getting put together, is when we move upstream to more the political level, the duty of care team have made those linkages between the Declaration for the Protection of Humanitarian Personnel and again, reinforcing this idea of duty of care accountability and governance framework and the requirement for it. And so again, psychosocial risk assessment is an example of that happening on the ground. So shared principles, commitments, and operational concerns, in that we're all pushing in the same direction, which is about when we're asking people to stay and deliver, and for WFP being a very frontline, operationally focused organization, when we're asking people to stay in these very dangerous environments, what are we doing to also show that we're taking their welfare, their safety, and these risk factors into hand as well? Sorry, if we can go back to the one before, Lucia. So the declaration is very much international law piece, which is not so much what me as a psychologist is doing per se, but both these documents are tied together through the UN Secretary Council resolution, and the resolution calls on humanitarian personnel, calls for the protection of humanitarian personnel, and it calls on actors, which is member states and organizations or agencies like WFP, to take concrete steps. So what are we doing to prevent harm and ensure and improve operational safety? And psychosocial risk assessment is one of these ways that we can take these concrete steps to better improve the actual psychological safety of our teams on the ground. So that's quite upstream from the work that certainly me and the team do day to day. But if we go back downstream to where we do work, it's the rolling out of psychosocial risk assessment, again, with wellness as the technical lead, but certainly not the only, let's say, accountability owner in this process. The idea being that accountability for mental health and wellness lives across the organization. And certainly psychosocial risk assessment is something that leaders have found is a very tangible, kind of concrete step that they can take to show accountability and take steps to improve the well-being of their teams. We're embedding the risk assessment into the duty of care and organizational risk processes. So making sure that when we measure, monitor, and mitigate risks, we're doing it from the psychosocial perspective as well. The future for us is we're learning from UNHCR's experience. So looking to digitalize, looking to use a similar dashboard and continue rolling this out, like I said, across the organization. We're going to continue to refine the risks in the corporate risk register and the risk catalog. And again, that's going to be a back and forth process that as more data comes in, we can greater refine that. We're also working on building a mental health and psychosocial risk register on its own. So the security division has one, the HR division has one. And so we're looking to use this data as well to build one specifically for mental health. So that way, you know, someone mentioned at the beginning, mental health is seen as this kind of nice thing to do. But if we can look at it from a risk perspective, we can see that it's not just a nice thing to do, but actually something that's an operational imperative to make sure that we're keeping teams safe in the environments that we're asking them to work in. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet, for sharing such a rich presentation on what you're doing with your team at WFP, and you mentioned some of the keywords that were already mentioned in previous panels. Integration, the fact that psychosocial risk management is this is not just about psychosocial risks; these are organizational risks, and how you are integrating them into other risk frameworks, and of course the emphasis on accountability. But let me give the floor now to Samar Haidar, who's one of the vice presidents of UNISERV.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Samar. I'm one of the vice presidents of UNISERV. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the UN system, the unions of the UN system, so each entity will have its own union, and those unions are grouped in 3 different union federations, and UNISERV is one of them. The president of UNISERV is actually sitting right there, but she just wasn't in the mood for speaking today. So, I mean, I'll try to be quick because I really would like to get a question and even put pushback if it's interesting. And I mean, as you all know, the whole system is going through a massive crisis right now, and it's a time of shrinkage and of job loss, and it's a time of a huge transformation, and it's a very difficult time for everybody, particularly also for staff representatives. And I agree with everybody who said earlier, well, it's the worst time, but it's also the best time. Because I think that unfortunately some things have become now, some issues have become now salient in a way that they weren't before. And I think that in some sense that they can no longer be avoided or ignored. So what I'd like to bring to this debate, and also before I forget, I just also want to acknowledge that this kind of initiative where there's outside expert, internal expert, academics that is so very open and that is not constrained politically in any way is very rare, and it's really great. And I wish we could have more of that about many, many issues, not just mental health. I think that as an organization would fare much better if this becomes more frequent and more normalized. So what I'd like to touch upon, and it's also like it's very general and it may sound like a little bit too idealistic, a little bit too out there, but I just would like to make a couple of suggestions on how to look at the issue specifically for the benefits of the people who are not from the system. And then I will say a few things about mental health as a system, how unions may see or not see their role, and what we think works and what we think doesn't work. So what we heard a lot about effort being made to change the managerial culture, to change the workplace culture. And that's all, of course, very important. And then we heard that there were also like major driving factors, risk factors, such as exposure to trauma, to work overload, to job security, lack of prospect, lack of career growth, etc. And this is very true. But I think this is also not the. It doesn't do justice to how fundamental the issue is. And what I would like to what I would like us to think about today, and I think Stavroula made my work much. I mean, she sort of paved the way for what I was going to say when she spoke about the importance of the macro context. And I think that a lot of the knowledge that everything we heard was based on was knowledge that comes from the outside world, from the outside social world and its institution, its political institution, its knowledge institution. And the UN is very different in nature. And it doesn't strike the eye immediately necessarily, and it's also like when we start working at the UN, when someone starts working in the UN, it's really not striking. It's more like a slow realization that we inhabit institutions and a social world that is completely different from anything that is outside. And I think that really matters for various things, but it also matters for mental health. And I don't think we look at this often enough. So it's, for example, a feature of the system that in terms of macro factors, there's a sort of division of labor. So some major factors such as working conditions, salaries, benefits are looked at by the Fifth Committee, so that's the member states and their subsidiary organs. There's also an independent commission that plays a very important role, just saying this for outsiders. It's called the International Civil Service Commission, and they define, I mean, they have a wide mandate, but they define our salaries and benefits. But remarkably, and that's very different than the situation is in the national context. A lot of macro factors are actually in management's hand, in the leadership, in the hand of the leadership, that encompasses some, for example, of our civil and political rights, and it also encompasses, to some extent, the way staff representation is set up. So I really think that there's a deficit of knowledge in this field. So there's not enough interest from the outside in this matter. There are many people, for example, wondering, well, what is the justice system in the UN like? And what does it do to mental health and behavior to have such a justice system or to have such an accountability system? What does the fact that unlike anybody who is enjoying their civil and political rights in a national context where they can vote and engage and have a meaningful use of those rights through shaping, I don't know, their governments and their working conditions, etc. We don't have any of that. So what doesn't that have an effect? I'm sure it does. And there's the life of an international civil, those are just a couple of examples, but the life of an international civil servant is really governed from within in ways that are, I think, indirectly impactful in terms of behavior, in terms of how power and authority are distributed, and of course, in terms of mental health. I think that there's too much medicalization of mental health because ultimately, I mean, I hear well-being and mental health used interchangeably. But I think that well-being is not necessarily something to be medicalized. I think that in many ways, I think it's very often, a thought that I have often is that there's an assumption that someone can do well under any circumstances and they can be resilient and whatever, but usually those are not the people who are doing well. So that there's too much focus on alleviating the suffering and not enough focus on the systemic factors. And there's, as my colleague said, a huge burden on the individual and a huge burden on the counselors. And honestly, I don't think this is where the issue should be fixed. This is just a stopgap. And I hear you do that when I heard your reply, and you seem to take this to do your to conceive of counseling as something that's very sort of hands-off and very respectful of the autonomy of people, so that you would allow them to be in a better place to do something. But it's also that very often is that they can't. So one of the issues is that we give the impression to people that they can do something when they can't. And the other thing that I would like to say, I think that there's some very deep thinking to be done in this respect, and it's not easy, and we cannot do it internally. So I think that the way forward is absolutely opening it. I mean, trying our best to raise the an interest of academics, and also of like a genuine interest of member states and their experts, because there's also, I mean, some things are not necessarily the product of a conscious decision. This is just not what member states who are sitting in New York do or worry about. So there are ways that to put this on their radar. Maybe like the next conference should happen in New York, alongside the Fifth Committee. I heard this morning several times. Well, those are things that member states do not want to hear. I mean, I understand, but I think they have the power to decide. It's an open question whether they have the power to hear what they want to hear, or the right to hear what they want to hear. I mean, this is really something that we should also consider as an organization, because we can't claim that we're value-based if this is how we roll. So we just anticipate, we make the questions and the answers. What I thought also was missing is, I mean, I hear you, it's a straightforward argument to be made, to make, and it's very persuasive that it decreases cost, it decreases organizational risk to have, you want me to, okay. But I don't think, I mean, back to the fact that this is not a medical issue, I don't think that there's enough exploitation of the fact that this is also essential for the accountability of office, so that it's essential for integrity and for mandate delivery, that that the organization is fair, and that there are no systemic issues that prevent people from doing their jobs, or prevent or destroy trust, or destroy psychological safety. And I know that it's not exactly the l'air du temps. It's not, no one wants to hear about this. It's like kind of anachronistic to be saying things like that right now, but this is, I mean, we can still say it. We may not be able to do something about it, but we can still say it. Now, very quickly on the union's experience with support. We hear a lot about, I've heard it a couple of times today. Well, we work with the union, the staff council has a role to play. And that's not a remark, that's a question. We don't know what your expectations are. But we know, for example, what doesn't work, and we're not often heard. So I'll say two things very quickly. Sometimes there's an urge to do something for mental health, like immediately. So there's been a lot of, like, we've been asked about, do you think that career advice is a good idea? Do you think that some mental health event? Very often, actually, doing nothing is, and it's counterintuitive, it's better than doing something. Because some of the stuff I saw, frankly, are not putting, maybe they make some people feel slightly better, but it doesn't mean that they're necessarily putting them in a good place to react and see, you know, help themselves for what's coming. I don't know that it makes any sense, for example, to, you know, tell people things like, well, you've done it 20 years ago and you can do it now. I don't think that's true. You enter this organization, you spent 20 years in it. You don't know what the workplace outside is like. No one knows what are the chances of a UN or an international civil servant on the private market. They're very low, that we know, but it's just not fair, I think, to instill positivity. I don't want to renege on the teachings of positive psychology. Of course, people need to do well, to feel good, to be able to do things, and to be motivated. But this is really something that we're seeing right now. We were hearing about elevator pitches and being the CEO of your own life. And as union representatives, sorry, I mean, I don't want to say where I heard this, but maybe the people are in the room, and please don't be, or online, don't be offended. But as unions, please don't, don't do this. It doesn't, it's also discrediting. And the other thing I wanted to say was about stigma. I mean, I certainly also, I'm putting the question to you, stigma of what? Because when something is caused occupationally, I also, what I see a lot is that, well, people talk about it, but then it normalizes the problem rather than the feelings and the bad emotions being, you know, the way to a solution. They just, that they're locked into this, oh, there's no stigma, you know, your lived experience is important, and we stay there. So that's also something that I mean, I had a lot more to say, but I don't want to speak longer than that. Thank you.
In the interest of time, thank you very much to my co-panelists. I am, I think in the positive time, we have reached the end of scheduled time, but I think in the positive time, we have reached the end of scheduled time, but I hope you can give me 5 more minutes from your wine, because we have a wine reception just after this. So please bear with us, and on colleagues online, please bear with us for a few moments as well. I'd like to begin first by thanking everybody here. I'm sorry, just also introduce myself. I'm Aditya Jain. I'm not let Lucia introduce me simply because of time. So I'll introduce myself, I told her. So I'm Aditya Jain. I'm Professor of Sustainable Work and Development at University of Nottingham. I'm also the External Relations Officer at the moment of the European Academy. In terms of way forward, I'd like to summarize some of the things that have been mentioned and also touch upon a couple of questions that have been raised online. So the EAOHP was set up 25 years ago. As you see on the folder, there's a 25-year anniversary, which we celebrated last year. And one of the things we've always talked about is how do we bridge the gap? The reason why the Academy was established, and we are not the only association, as you've seen again in your packs, tomorrow we'll talk about a global partnership. We are very happy that we are being hosted by the ILO. We hope to bring different stakeholders together, different associations together. And that is what we will talk about in more detail tomorrow. The Academy was established to further the discipline of occupational health psychology. And I'm not going to go into the detail of what OHP is. It basically is about how do you make the working environment better. And it's interdisciplinary. There are lots of perspectives, and it's about trying to align those perspectives. And it's about not just research and academia, it's about taking that research and evidence and putting it into policy and practice. So we have a practice forum, an education forum, and a research forum. So it's aligning those 3 elements, and that's what you see those 3 lines in our logo for. Now, it's the reason I mention this is because when you look at forward, it's always useful to look back. The word psychosocial is a mouthful. We've heard that from many colleagues today. The word was conceptualized, defined by the ILO, along with the WHO in 1986. It's psychosocial is used for psychosocial support, which is very prominent, of course, in relation to counseling, but also it's used in relation to risk management. It means very different things. Psychosocial support and psychosocial risk are completely different things. But they refer to the interaction between how we feel and the environment within which we operate. And in a work context, we've discussed it a lot, process matters, roles and responsibilities matters, and understanding who plays what role, what stakeholders play, and expectations of those stakeholders is important. Staff counselors are not going to fix the problem. Staff associations are not going to fix the problem alone. And individuals, of course, everybody has responsibility, but they alone cannot fix the problem. I like the point about the CEO of your life. It is funny, I have to say. The thing I want to make as a way forward, I think, is the importance of partnership. So we are, the reason why this event is happening, the reason why we have a policy-focused event tomorrow is to align what we've heard today from the UN as an example of a very large, complex organization, using that experience to see how research can help organizations. We've heard examples of that today. We've heard there's a journey that we are on, and it's great to hear that. So again, thank you for all the work that everybody is doing in this. And this is also a call for other colleagues online, other experts to contribute. We've heard the call from other speakers as well. There is a lot to learn and to share and work together on. And finally, what I'd like to also highlight is, I think, as we look at what global partnerships mean, unfortunately, the way we are incentivized within an organization, within academia, the UN is not very different from a university, a UN entity, I mean, not the whole UN. It's very similar in terms of organizational culture. It's very difficult to talk about things, and that's because of how we operate. Silos are a huge problem, and it's not uncommon in, of course, other organizations. Politics plays a role, and so on. It's very widely acknowledged now that we have to look interdisciplinary. So when you talk about a university context, everything is about interdisciplinary research, but very few people really understand what that means, because it's uncomfortable to talk about things we are not fully aware of or know. And it's not straightforward to make those links. So having meetings like this, having these discussions is really helpful. So we hope you continue to join us tomorrow. Because it is relevant. Now, national policies are not applicable to the UN. Even ILO conventions are not directly relevant to the UN, but they all give a frame to link it to duty of care and other aspects. The couple of questions that are online are around how do we monitor? How do we, what is, policy cannot just be about risk assessment. Absolutely. The process matters. Embedding that process matters even more. And that relates to all the things that my speaker has said. So again, thank you very much. I don't want to hold you for more longer. And when we hope to see you tomorrow morning at 9. Thank you very much.